Welcome back to this second part of the conference. Two housekeeping matters. We have an English speaker on our panel this morning. We have interpreters. If you need a bit of assistance language-wise, then we have some earphones at the back of the room. Now, for all those tweeting during the conference, for the past 45 minutes, we are live streaming online, so you can inform the whole of the Twitter world of what is going on here at the conference. So the second part of this conference means that we have an impressive lineup on the panel today to talk about a subject about public policy and funding of digital productions and the decision-making behind of that. We have a number of people from different bodies. Guillaume Blanchot, CNC, Jason Hall, Managing Director of Teebster, who is later going to tell us more about what he actually does, and I'm sure he's going to tell us a little bit about Birmingham. We have Peten, Head of Sector Development Producers for Media Programming in Brussels, and Pascal Rogard, Director of the SACD, which is the Independent Authors Society, and Karine Halpern, who is going to be hosting this debate. Thanks, Bruno. So thank you to everybody for being here. We are going to be talking in French and English during this discussion. We have some English speakers with us. I'm going to be hosting the debate mainly in French, and we will speak as slowly as possible so that the interpretation is as seamless as possible. Mr. Pascal Rogard, I will reintroduce you. You are Director General of the Society for Authors and Composers, the SACD. You have been director there since 2004. You are head of the French Coalition for Cultural Diversity. You are also have several national honors, knighthoods in the French system, and that was the little surprise I wanted to announce to everybody, because you've just received another national honor. We are, it's the 20th anniversary and you are a producer for independent productions, and you support interactive productions as well. So you're head of media programming as well. You also are part of the EACEA as well. Jason Hall is with us this morning from the UK. Thank you very much, Jason, for being with us. You are Director of Teebster, 15 years of experience in distribution of mobile content, and manages a fund of over 5 million euros for digital production. And these funds identify and develop projects, and is a fund that's related to Channel 4, E4. And so Jason's going to give us an update on these funds and what developments are going on there. Guillaume Blanchot, thanks for being with us, You're head of Multimedia and Technical Industries for Cinematography. Again, the remit is to support creation and distribution of content, and this together with new types of creation. I suppose we can talk about the support of restructuring of the business model for this kind of distribution. Monsieur Rogard, perhaps you would like to kick this discussion off talking about the latest news from the SACD. I think there are a lot of things going on at the moment in your society. Well, how can I say what's topical at the SACD? Well, at the moment it's with the National Senate, so we'll have news in the next few minutes, hours, because there are current of decisive measures that have to be adopted on royalties and private copyright. Now, in terms of the digital world, I would say that the first role that we have in collective management is collecting royalties, which is managed by an association system which was set up by authors for authors, because you have to know that our society is made up only of authors, and we have a mutual collection system for these royalties. The role that we play at the SACD when we have the arrival of digital world was to negotiate contracts which would guarantee payment to authors for works broadcast through new media that came onto the scene, in particular community sites, social sites. Now, these collective websites have often been the object of criticism. They aren't necessarily responsible for these criticisms, but sometimes there was illegal use of the works that were posted on these sites. So there were a number of legal decisions, and case law has not put into question the hosting quality, but as a host, when they host content that has been illegally obtained, then they have to remove it on a permanent basis. As these websites are increasingly becoming not only host websites, but also host actual programs that have been produced, and they produce these new content. So I'm talking about the Daily Motions and YouTube. So I talk about Daily Motions first because of family ties, but financially, obviously, I think the leader is actually YouTube. We negotiated with these two platforms contracts because they themselves have agreements with producers who broadcast their work via their websites, and in many cases now with a number of TV broadcasters. And for this reason, there are a number of TV channels where catch-up TV is channeled via these community sites, such as Arte, for example, in France. We began negotiating the first agreement, and the first one was concluded 3 years ago with a TV broadcaster. I can't give you the financial details of the terms of these contracts because I'm subject to confidentiality, but it's basically a typical kind of contract that you could imagine with TVs, i.e. a percentage of revenue from use of content. And then after lengthy discussions, we managed last year to conclude an agreement with the DAGP, which is the company that manages fixed images, an agreement with YouTube as well, which was more complicated than with Dailymotion, primarily because their legal context for copyright is different from the notion of royalties here, and so they don't have this notion of direct collection of royalties via an author society. And secondly, because they didn't want to give us our turnover, the figure for their turnover. So the state of Delaware, where Google is located, meant that they couldn't give this kind of information to little foreigners such as us. And so this led on to a number of discussions, and we finally came to a common agreement which meets the basic principles of authors' copyright, which again, I am tied to absolute confidentiality on the terms of that agreement. So we collect the monies, and then we redistribute these collected funds. This year, we will have the first allocation, and I know this process is slow, but we will be redistributing the first revenue from content distributed on Dailymotion. Documentation on these websites is more complicated than on linear websites, such as for TV sites. That explains the slowness. And secondly, the contractual relations that we have, and with new thresholds, etc., we have to subject them to legal scrutiny to make sure that they meet all the legal criteria in our country, and then that has to be approved by a General Assembly. But basically, things have begun, and now we are in a position to distribute the first revenues to authors of productions that have been broadcast over these sites, or more particularly Dailymotion, because YouTube is a more recent agreement. Now, obviously, the revenues we're talking about has nothing to do with being able to buy yourself a sandwich in the corner shop around the corner. But we're not talking about the kinds of revenue for royalties when broadcast on TV. because these websites have a lot of publicity, but from an economical point of view, they are still minor in comparison to major broadcasters with whom we have major royalty agreements. So the first step is to collect and redistribute. And this is testimony to the fact that French-style royalties, where authors receive a percentage of the revenue generated, which was founded by Beaumarchais in 1977 and was taken up in an act, in 1777, which was then taken up after the revolution, because representation of authors' rights is a revolutionary notion that was instated at the revolution. However, there is a level of flexibility, which means that we can adapt to new technology. We also have the ability to introduce into our system major internet players who generally are subject to a completely different legal framework. So this is a positive thing. And in our discussions with Dailymotion and YouTube, once YouTube, for example, accepted a number of basic notions that were unfamiliar to them to begin with, we then moved on to a very healthy relationship, and we're dealing with very pleasant people. You know, there are people who were less easy to deal with during negotiations, even in France. So this is our first remit, is to collect and redistribute. The second part of our remit is based on the fact that we needed to give the support to new format productions for Internet. Guillaume, I think, will talk about this, because CNC has more important initiatives than we have, and they have public service means that we don't have. They receive taxpayers' money. We only receive a percentage of royalties. We launched, for our part, two initiatives. One, in association with Orange. We set up Orange bursaries for productions in the new format as part of the Beaumarchais Association. This association manages the private copyright fund. In France, 25% of copyright rights are not paid to the beneficiaries, the artists, the authors, but are kept for general interest initiatives. And so the SACD decided that all individual assistance would be transited via an independent association to ensure that there was no doubt about a collusion between the board of the SACD and other parties. So all individual rights that are paid to authors go via, or used to go via, because we have a new system now that's set up recently, via the Beaumarchais Association. At one time I stayed with Didier Lombard, with Xavier Couture, and they were interested in this. The Beaumarchais Association has a lot of know-how in detecting talent in the performing arts, long feature films, or other audiovisual productions. And we decided to set up a fund which would assist writing in new formats. So we had a number of prize winners, awards, at the SACD a few days ago, in fact, and we have a new raft of interesting new projects that can be broadcast over the Internet, TV, that are interactive. And it's nice to see the arrival of a new generation of authors, which up until now has been very sober, for those who are familiar with the SACD, which is in a very beautiful private building in Paris. So this is the remit to do with writing. And we also, if there are a number of interesting projects for Orange, they can support production of those projects. Now, there's another important aspect for authors working with new formats, which is more developed writing, which is the development of pilot projects. So we have on a Web 2.0 operating system, we have 50,000 euros with about 10 sponsors, which is about 5,000 euros per project. And here distribution isn't done by the Beaumarchais Association, but because we want to stay independent, the role of distribution is conferred to external members, people who are outside the SAD, and juries that are made up of web players. At the SACD, we're fortunate in as much as we have a multimedia director, Alain Ledibert-Mer, who has worked for a long time in this field and worked a lot on Intranet and Canal+, who has brought with him his expertise and know-how for this sector. He's now number 2 at Allociné, and they're about to launch a cinema channel via the internet. Therefore, we set up this independent system. The first bursaries were distributed, have been distributed, and we'll see what comes out of that. So, to sum up, our remit is, if a work is broadcast over Facebook, we will contact Facebook to tell them that we have to collect monies for the rights of the authors of which the works they've broadcast, and then a support initiative, which is for the general interest of our author community. And this support is for TV, cinema, performing arts, as I said, music, and it's, I think, therefore very important to maintain and defend these assistance. It's payment, it's not a tax, because very often on copyright, it's the journalist says that it's a tax. It's not. We as producers, authors, we are paid in copyright. So this is a proportional revenue, is it? Well, not really. Proportional revenue for turnover, that's the idea of royalties. Private copyright was set up in 85, enacted in 1985. It's part of the European Directive for the Information Society, and it's about legal licensing, i.e. creators, authors, artists, composers. They have the right to publish or not publish their work. It's difficult today to prevent people taking personal copies, and their remuneration is included in the price of the media it's distributed. So it's applied today, for example, on smartphones. So there's only one medium which is, by a long stretch, which is the PC, which unfortunately doesn't come within the scope of this act because of a political decision to encourage web development in the country, and so PCs were exempted from this act. Today, unfortunately, the situation is rather complicated because we have tablet PCs which are subject to this private copyright payment, and it's difficult to draw a distinction, obviously, between a PC, a portable PC, and a tablet PC, and so it's rather sort of make-believe distinction. I think we should remember that the Beaumarchais Association is a cultural initiative that was launched as part of the SACD. Yes, it's an initiative aimed at culture. 25% of the private copyright have to be paid by collective management companies for general interest initiatives. We have an association for private copyright which brings together all of these management companies that manage these funds. And for many events, for example, you have a label which says culture with a private copyright mention, which is on posters or on cinema productions, which receive the support of these initiatives. Now, what was good in the 1985 Act, which is a law that was adopted unanimously by the French Parliament under the auspices of Jacques Lang, Minister of Culture at the time, the Parliament and copyright holders agreed to mutualize this 25% of revenue and not have it redistributed to authors and artists, but to pool it in order to fund general interest initiatives, in order to further finance cultural activities. So that's 180 million euros, and 25% of that obviously is quite an amount, and this amount is therefore distributed across France, and I don't think there is a single department, county in France which hasn't received or benefited from this system. Thank you very much, Pascal Rogard. We will now talk about the European Commission, the media program, and how this has gradually moved towards supporting digital creation. And could you explain somewhat how this support works and how they work together, complement each other?
The European input, I will do it in English.
Thank you very much.
Even if for me French is very easy, but also for you. So, first of all, you mentioned the anniversary, the 20 years of the media program. And personally, I'm working with this program more than 10 years now. For interactive works today, so I'm running this scheme. But it changed a lot during the years, I have to say. So even before me, it already existed since '96, a support which was called for Multimedia project. And this was the period between 1996 2000. I think that at that time it was quite too early. It was an interesting model because we had the multimedia first stage support and the multimedia second stage support, which was then first for concept, and then it was more dedicated for production. And the amount were quite interesting and important for a substantial, I would say, for the production, because it went up to 250,000 euro at that time. But why that model? Maybe we can discuss that, maybe it's an interesting one, but it failed at that time because it was an advance on revenues. So we are still chasing some very old agreements, and that's why after the new program, which was then launched in 2001, it only remained a multimedia support for project individual within the single project support. So I'm running development, so we support project on an individual basis. This is called single project, and on a slate of projects. So during 2001 to 6, this multimedia support was existing, but the average number of projects that we were receiving all over Europe was very, very low. I have to say that in 2007 we were receiving only 17 applications. So 17 only. So we decided that it was necessary to reboost absolutely that area where it was clearly that there was a lot of potential. So that's why in 2008 we created a specific scheme which is called now Support for Interactive Works. The budget was, at that time when we launched, 2.5 million. It decreased a little bit last 2 years, but it will go back to 2.5 million for the last 2 years of the program. So we are going to launch in September a new call, and the guidelines will be stable for the last 2 years of the program, which means 12 and 13.
For single project.
For a single project again. So it's on an individual basis. The amount is minimum 10,000 euro, and it goes up to 150,000 euro. So still it's a substantial amount, and above all, which is very important, it's a grant. So there is no, we totally understand, because this is the philosophy of the development, we want to associate us with the risk and share the risk with you. So there is no obligation even to produce, let's say, because there are so many different elements that could lead to the success of a project or not. So we can share with you this risk. So this was historically, I think. It's important to understand to whom this support is addressed, because not everybody can apply. So this is a direct support for producers. And we want to support independent producers. So independent meaning for us that you don't have in your shareholding a majority, let's say, a TV broadcaster. This means, I think it's the French definition as well, so you can easily understand that. Of course, you have to be European, so being French, of course, but European participating to our 32 countries. So, and you also have to have as main activity production, interactive production or audiovisual production. In this area, we are a little bit more open. We can accept some equivalence, while it's very strict for audiovisual production. And also, it's the only area in development where we accept new companies, startup companies. Usually, we request really that companies have already are existing some time, but here you can create a new company really for your project.
A company that can be dedicated to digital content, for instance.
Of course, digital content. That's why I'm saying interactive and equivalence. Mm-hmm. So you need to be experienced, but this is not the major problem to apply, I have to say, because it's really in your interest as well to attach to the development of the new project someone who is experienced. So you could use the credits. So of course we are really looking for important credits concerning lead actors in a team, but it's quite easy to be eligible from that side. This is the first part, being the technical one, because as I said, not everybody can apply. And also on the technical side, we request from you, because we are supporting authors, and we request that the producer has secured the rights, or at least optioned the rights with the conceptor, I would say. Minimum, it's the rights to the concept of this project. Then which kind of project are we looking for? So, as I said, we change since the creation in 2008 of this scheme. We change it quite every year, and this is because we want to keep in line with what's happening. And also in 2009 we had a big reflection and repositioning and refocusing of this scheme. Before I said it was multimedia project supported, meaning also standalone game, let's say standalone project. But in 2009, we considered that our core business and our mandate for this present program, media program, is the audiovisual sector. And we wanted that this audiovisual sector and its actors being more aware of the new opportunities offered by the interactive possibilities. And that's why we restricted the possible interactive work that could be selected only to projects complementing an audiovisual project, a traditional one, more meant for cinema or television, let's say. So this is, we put it in the context of multi-platform, cross-media or whatever approach.
Excuse me, do you mean that it would be a complementary program attached to
So it's a project interactive itself. It's digital content specifically designed for internet, PC, or a mobile device, but it must be associated with an audiovisual project, meaning more often in the case
linear
of
content?
animation. Yes, animation series for TV or for instance, an example that I can give now, it's The Prodigies. We supported the interactive part of this project. So I have to say that we had some...
Can you speak?
I have to say that not everybody was happy, especially the developers, but the idea was not at all to exclude them, but it was, of course, to highlight, I would say, and make more aware the audiovisual field of the opportunities, and also we wanted to create synergies. It's still a work in progress, I have to say. It seems that it's not that easy. So we are also seeing that we have a phenomenon where audiovisual companies are creating multimedia or cross-media departments, and we are in line with this. for the last 2 years of the program. So we support around 20 projects. It's very important to underline that it's not only being interactive and only complementing an audiovisual project that then you should envisage to apply, because with our budget we are really looking for prototypes, new models. So it was a lot about this morning, new models, new opportunities, and that's why you have really to first of all, bring a project where it's totally consistent to have a cross-media approach. This is the most important thing, first of all, in my opinion. And then we are looking for innovation and originality against what is existing. So if it is to repeat the same kind of project, this will be a handicap, I would say, for media, because we are trying to support from a technical point of view as well, innovative projects.
So when you say prototype, it can be like the work in progress for a technical development of a project?
Technical development is also part of the cost that could be eligible. Yes. So it's important because originality would, of course, in the artistic approach, but also you have to attach technical know-how, which could totally miss to an audiovisual producer.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there are some ambiguity with the wording of interactivity. So for us, interactivity is really where the user, the end user, can affect its content. And for us also, it's very important to have a narrative component within this interactivity. And we are also supporting projects that have European commercial potential. So this is not really so underlined in the other schemes, I would say, but here as it's particular prototypes and it's a lot of business, we want that you think about the business model behind.
Thank you. It's very good transition because I think Jason has already experienced such prototypes and digital interactive content. Can you tell us about what's going on in your country, because there's a lot of transition nowadays.
I'll try not to talk too much around what's going on politically, because we really would be here all afternoon. But essentially, change of government earlier in the year, and so the whole structures for supporting the creative industries have changed massively and are still going through a period of transition right now. The UK Film Council is the biggest hit. That they have completely gone, which was a big surprise for everybody, and been replaced by the British Film Institute, which
that was a big surprise.
has already been, it was for them as well, it really was. And from my own organisation, I have been working for Screen West Midlands, which is one of the 9 regional screen agencies throughout the UK, which were originally established by the UK Film Council. So these organisations are now merging into one organisation called Creative England.
Creative England.
Creative England, yeah, and this will launch on the 1st of October. So at the moment, the fund I've been managing, a digital media innovation fund, is sort of in sleep mode, let's say, while this transition happens, and we're looking to hopefully relaunch this in October of this year. But in the meantime, it will probably take a slightly different form than how it has been, purely based on the learning from the last 3 years of running this fund. We've learned an awful lot during that time. A lot of areas where I believe the focus was absolutely right, but there's definitely other areas that I believe we can be going into as well.
And you've been also coaching projects somehow, working with Teebster?
Very much so, yeah. We're both for Teebster and through Screen West Midlands through this project. A key part of this fund is it's really not about the money. The money is great. You know, of course, everyone is looking for funding for something, and you need that to get the project off the ground. But for the investments to be a sound investment, both from the public side and from the private investors, you need to know that the partners are there. You know, the team to deliver it is there. The business model is right. All of the various different other elements are there and in place for that project to succeed, and that doesn't happen like that. It's all well and good saying, well, here's an innovation fund, come and send us your brilliant ideas, but where are these brilliant ideas going to come from when you're talking around something that is, you want something innovative, you want something brand new, and that doesn't happen magically. So you need to do an awful lot of work to create partnerships between legacy media businesses and digital media businesses and technology companies to create partnerships with finance partners and distribution partners, and really to think around a key part of this fund is it's not just about content, or actually what does content even mean actually?
Can you tell us what you mean by legacy properties, and how they do actually relate with the new digital content? Do you have maybe just mention one study case so we have at least one example?
Sure, yeah. There's quite a few. The one that immediately springs to mind is not exactly legacy media, but a similar model. Legacy media, I mean by that film and TV companies essentially, or music or publishing. Media that has existed for a long time, that is going through a period of transition, that knows it needs to change in this brave new world. And so we took the approach of partnering a lot of these organisations with the more current digital media producers, or guys who really understand social media or games and can help them get over the initial...
Bring a new
problems and
expertise?
hurdles. Absolutely, yeah. And it's very often through these partnerships that things spark off, and that's where innovation happens, where you get people from different sectors working together, and that's where innovation happens. Probably the best example of this was we funded a project called Such Tweet Sorrow, which was it's the Royal Shakespeare Company, so very long history, traditional, the biggest cultural export in the UK, theatre production company. And we teamed them up with a very innovative digital media company called Mudlark, and funded through our fund and with Channel 4, a TV company supporting this of all things. And the production was a production of Romeo and Juliet on Twitter that played out in real time over 5 weeks. So each of the characters has their own...
It's still on, you can check.
It's still there, yeah. It's,
go on Twitter.
A massively innovative project. And we were interested because there's a question of, okay, can Twitter, as this new emerging medium, what forms of content can that support? Is it just a communication tool? Is it a tool for spreading news? But I'm interested because if you look at the evolution of any emerging platform, from radio to TV to film to whatever, it always starts off in the same route. It starts off by spreading news, starts off by connecting people, and ultimately it evolves and gets mature, and it can then develop drama and comedy and other forms of content. So the question is Twitter at this point now? And so that's what the project was there to explore. And if so, what are the business models behind that?
So do you think this project would not have been on screens without the support of...
Absolutely not. It's still now, we proved the model, and it got massive worldwide attention. It was written about all over the world, which is great. But it's still... there's still a question mark of, okay, how do you make money from that? And if you're not going to make money from that, then who's going to pay to support it? Channel 4 are definitely interested in looking at this space, and already you see Twitter accounts from characters from popular American TV shows, whether it's a fan account or an official one. This is already happening, and you get little spin-off stories and side stories, and so it's really interesting creatively. The problem is that to do it well, to do it to a professional standard like Such Tweet Sorrow did, that costs money to manage that project. So who's going to fund that when there's no obvious revenue streams there?
And where are you at the present in terms of restructuring the fund? Are you about to launch something soon?
Well, we're literally, today, when I left this morning, there's an application in with the UK government to extend this fund. The finance appears to be in place. It's just a question over the management of the fund. So we're into the final negotiations, really, around whether or not we can relaunch it. We're very hopeful. But we'll see.
Okay, thank you very much. Donc, Guillaume Blanchot,
Thank you very much.
information sur...
Guillaume Blanchot, could you give us a little bit of information as well in what you're doing? Okay.
Oui, l'actualité, effectivement, c'est...
Okay, CNC news, something to do about taxes. As Monsieur Rogard mentioned, we take a small cut on distribution of certain works. That we also have subsidies which we pass on to creators, producers, in particular for projects for interactive media, internet projects, cross media, depending on the term you prefer. I won't give you an in-depth, detailed description of the selection process that we have for new media project selection, but this funding that we offer is both for transmedia, cross-media, i.e. across several platforms, and we can also help authors, producers. And then we have a second part of that, which is aimed more at solely internet-based projects, not on cross-platforms. And we have projects both at the writing stage, screenwriting stage, but also when they have reached the production stage. Now, the work that we do in that field includes approval for this kind of subsidy by the European Commission, which regulates state subsidy, and was wondering about the compatibility of these subsidies with competition law, which is a topic that often occupies the center of debate within the CNC. And the European Commission signaled that the state aid that was given to cross-media was cultural help, cultural assistance, which obviously is positive for us in as much as we are fund holders. So the European Commission finally recognized that an interactive work wasn't necessarily destined for a traditional channel, could be an audiovisual work, which shows that the European Commission, whilst applying its own doctrine, can have some flexibility, or is flexible in some cases. Now, before moving on to the second point of news, the state aid that we set up about 4 years ago now has included the funding of 700 projects, of which 200 received subsidies, both 50% transmedia and 50% internet-specific projects. CNC decisions aren't necessarily, or are taken with a professional panel, the advice of a professional panel. And this is different to what John Hall just said. The selection process looks at the content and the actual screenwriting quality, the characters in the content, and as well looking at the business model that follows with distribution and possible revenue that can be drawn from the exercise. But the first and primary aspect is the artistic quality of the project and the contribution that would make in the world of fiction or documentaries, etc., being channeled through this cross-media platform. So that is about selective subsidies, which is part of the assistance that is given to transmedia and internet producers. Another part of our remit, which is a major part of our work, involves, and this is something that has recently been recognized, is the adoption of certain texts which underpin the principle of support given to audiovisual works for internet. This is called a COSIP, the audiovisual funding process. This is an industrial scale system that was set up in the 1980s and is a support funding system that is aimed to help the audiovisual industry, and up until now was only geared for TV production. So in the past few weeks, or since a few weeks ago, a producer producing content and has a right to subsidy, the support fund can be in part used for a production destined for internet. In other words, up until now, in order to activate this kind of support fund, you had to have part funding from either one or two television broadcasters. From now, in order to use this funding system, it's no longer necessary to have a stakeholder, a TV broadcaster as a stakeholder. You simply have to have, for example, a number of ISPs, which, of course, is a major innovation and corresponds more to meeting market changes at the moment. And of course, the aim is to facilitate industrialization of this kind of production. So as of now, at the CNC, we have a systematic support for internet-based productions and other works that are very close in nature to a TV production, with pre-financing and with internet base as well. And at the same time, we're going to continue our selective subsidization, which will be aimed more at experimental screenwriting productions, because our digital requirements are more flexible. So how do these two assistances, these two subsidies fit together? So if you have a systematic account at the CNC, if your project has proof of financial funding up to 25%, which is provided by an ISP, which is involved in works distribution, you can activate this automatic funding account. And this account, as I said, is financed by distribution of your work. But if you don't have an automatic account, or you have different funding for your project, you have several thousand euros, for example, provided by a press publisher or other forms of funding, then you come to the CNC and you apply for selective subsidy for getting funding for your project. Now, a technical aspect which is important for you here in the room is that this selective subsidy from now on can be a bridge towards getting an automatic funding account. So if you don't yet have the means to have an automatic funding account, but you get a subsidy from the selective project system, and in order to get proper funding which meets the COSIP, this funding account system, if you meet the criteria, the first set of criteria, the launch of the project will lead to the subsequent opening of the funding account. I don't know if that's clear. Okay, and this doesn't involve any TV broadcaster. So if you like, this funding account, which then will be funded or financed by royalties that are picked up when your work is distributed. So it's a unique account for the producer, which means that you can produce both for TV and new media. So this is a new innovation. Just a few words to say that this automatic account works with distribution networks that don't necessarily contribute to CNC. So, for example, Facebook, YouTube, Dailymotion. I can have automatic funding account, but the distribution platforms for the moment don't contribute back to the production funding system. Well, because you are leading me onto the field, or onto the topic of taxation, I'll start on that. Okay, the networks that you mentioned, some services which involve internet distribution, so for example, pay-per-view VOD, do contribute to this. However, in the case of distribution which is on a free view system, don't contribute to the system. But it is likely that in the near future there will be an attempt, and continuing with the current trend that's panning out, to have an advertising model which would contribute to production and creation via the CNC. Well, won't we then be falling into the ambit of cultural creation? Well, at the CNC, there are two aspects to our work. There's the cultural and the industrial. We have the creative and cultural industry, as John Hall said, but we can't ignore the economic and business model side of things. So striking a balance between the two, the selective funding puts the accent on creative production, and the COSIP, which is the automatic funding system, which doesn't look at the creative content but just on the fact that it's a work, means that we're not working on one and not the other. We're working on both sides, creative and business. Okay, so in terms of support given to projects, and I can open this question up to the floor as well. If anybody has any remarks, you may take the floor. I wanted to talk about assistance which is given to projects. Jason, for example, or anybody else, do you have any examples for this? And how today is the creative industry changing, developing? And again, anybody in the room here is free to take the floor if they have any remarks to make.
When you say support, do you mean financial support or other
No, it would be more like helping the project to develop even further, because the first commitment in terms of money may be not enough to actually.
That's a really, really big point, because I suspect this is true of most public funds. We can only take you so far. And certainly, we would always be looking for projects that have got the capacity to scale globally, because if you're doing stuff online, you should be. So we work very closely with other potential private investors and develop relationships with VCs, and did an awful lot of work for the projects that we invested in to put them in front of these companies and give them kind of support around how they should pitch to them. When they've got there, that we give them enough funding to essentially build a prototype, to build scale, to build a proof that there is an audience and there is a demand for the service they do. And then that is enough to take to a VC or a private investor and say, right, here it is. We've proven it works. We've proven we have an audience. We want to scale this up now to the international marketplace, and for that we need more private investment. And so, again, a lot of these companies needed support before they are confident enough and ready enough to be put in front of these kind of people.
Ok, donc ça c'est vraiment quelque chose qui est pris.
Thank you very much. This point is very much taken into consideration. I think it's also very much taken into consideration by the media program.
Au niveau du training, il existe des formations qui sont vraiment spécifiques dans ce domaine.
As far as the training is concerned, we have a specific training programs for cross-media, transmedia.
Il y a, par exemple,
For example, we have SACD Media as well. We have the multi-platform, multimedia business school. So these form part of the raft of initiatives that every year are relaunched in order to better meet the emerging needs and to ensure that we reach producers, but we also carry out networking initiatives and information, which again is very active. It's difficult, but there is a great effort in order to create this link between both worlds. Okay, in terms of project assistance, are there any questions or on what's been said during the panel discussion? A question for Pascal Rogard. I can only answer if you speak into the microphone. Yes. Karine de Chine Français. There was a program financed by Arte, 60 seconds, 60 seconds. I wondered whether the authors of this project received royalties, and where are you in terms of negotiations with on this level? I don't think there are any negotiations with Facebook for the moment. Now, you say that they've distributed or broadcast this fictive work, but in terms of their main core business, it's marginal, contrary to the other two websites I mentioned earlier on. Now, the royalties side is managed by the contracts between producers and the distributors. We manage the collective agreements, and we will soon be having negotiations with this operator, as we will do with others. We need to make sure that the competitive field in which we're playing is fair, and to have a level playing field between the operators distributing works, which are financed by advertising. All of these systems, the business models are basically advertising based. Now, part of these operators, thanks to internet and because of European legislation, located generally in countries where they escape taxation and other taxes such as VAT and other rules that have been set up to support creativity. And therefore, as the President said, we need to have a civilized internet world. And so we'll have to do everything in our power to ensure that fair competition rules are implemented in the internet. Journalists, there was an article in nouvelleobs.com, and this article explained the channels via which the monies collected were distributed. Sometimes there are fiscal havens which are of particular interest. But as and when you are a company of that stature, i.e. a leading company in terms of advertising revenue by keywords, I think that if you're in that position, you must behave in a loyal and fair way vis-à-vis other operators. And this is the case in audiovisual, in the case of audiovisual operators, where they have advertising, they pay taxes in the countries where they carry out their business, they redistribute revenue to the authors, and pay contributions, like in France, that help to finance the CNC and help to support the whole of the creative industry. Because if the CNC, or the fact that the CNC has this taxation system, it's not simply to fund the civil servants working in the structure, it's to support the creative industry. And I think that we should try and recoup some of these revenues from the internet industry. And I'm thinking in particular of the younger producers, to make sure that they can access the public at large without having to go through complicated channels, and in some cases obtain the recognition of the public. So no, don't worry, we won't let Facebook get away without paying their dues, and if they don't meet their dues, well, we will have to take the legal routes that are available to us. Okay, well, we haven't quite reached that stage yet. Any other remarks? Yes, a question for Europe. In the media program for a feature fiction film, I think one of the conditions, it has to be shot in more than 3 European countries in order to obtain funding. How are you going to define the criteria for Europe-wide multimedia? I mean, is it you have to have European characters or what? Well, I'm not that familiar with this rule, this set of criteria. This is the funding criteria for feature films. Perhaps the criteria for cross-media is more in distribution. But in terms of the funding that I was talking about, it's the company has to be European, yes. Now, there are tables which define what a European work is that are applied. And then there is funding for TV works. But again, there are no shooting-related criteria. It's simply the fact that you need to have 3 distributors. So the criteria will differ depending on the type of project involved. Our intention is not to set the threshold too high or make it difficult to get it. So a European company who applies for funding from this fund could be a startup. And yes, indeed, we have green shoot companies as well which can apply for this kind of funding. Are there any other questions in the room?
Parlez-vous anglais? Okay. I was just wondering, when you talked about that you already have contracts to get revenues or to get royalties for from the internet. I was wondering if that's just concerning the French nation, like is it only if I click on your content in France, or is it worldwide?
Non, nous, l'accord que nous avons conclu.
Yes, the agreement we made concerns mainly the YouTube website, youtube.fr. So the French part of the YouTube website and the ad revenues collected in France. Why this? Because YouTube and Google have signed up together with other authors' societies in Germany, in Italy and Spain, other similar agreements. Therefore, broadcasting French works via YouTube and Spain should be, as it is currently the case for broadcast channels, TV channels, will lead to a payment via the collective management company located in the country where the content is distributed, is broadcasted. In the United States, the system is quite different. It is not only built on copyright, but on a labor law, which means that authors have achieved their rights using fights and strikes. 2 or 3 years ago, we saw a very long strike led by the script writers in the United States in order to get some added payment over the internet content. Unlike Europe and the United States, we see that production is very much concentrated on several actors, and those guilds, those common management societies that gather first script writers and directors have contracts together with producers so that they do not have a direct contract with the broadcaster as we do, but they make agreements with the producers who then repay to them a part of their revenues. The French agreements are similar to those existing in other European countries. And as regards audiovisual content, there is one condition, which is that those countries have some common management societies having operating rights. In those countries, most rights are given to the producers. There's no common management except for some uses such as cable broadcasting or private copy payment, which have to be by law collectively managed. And in that case, authors have to pay lots of efforts in order to get their payment from the producers, and it is very difficult for them to get this proportional payment. Thank you very much. Do we have other questions? So we mentioned the issue of project coaching, maybe also the changes regarding the several businesses and trades. Does anyone want to talk about the changes and the new trades and businesses included? How do they all fit together? Who is the project operator? Who is the head of projects? We also have authors who are now project carriers. So what is your view on this topic?
First of all, I wholly support the work that SACD does, but any producers out there who think that the revenues they will make from license fees or royalties from website clicks is their business model, and that's going to be enough for them, is probably mistaken unless they're getting tens of millions of hits. So you absolutely have to look at other business models, other ways of generating revenue over and above the royalties you're going to make from advertising. In terms of other areas to look at, or where these partnerships and collaborations can be quite exciting for content producers, we did a lot of work helping creative companies look at entirely different markets, so looking beyond where their traditional distributors or distribution partners might be, looking beyond the TV companies, looking beyond the film companies and cinema chains. So, for example, I'm working with a major TV production company in the West Midlands who's now working directly, creating content for the NHS, for the National Health Service, and looking at the healthcare market where They know that the healthcare market needs to engage with young people, needs to engage with old people in new and interesting ways. They are not the best people to be producing content, because if they do, it's going to be very dry, very boring, very factually based, and people just won't watch it. And so they've teamed up with one of the biggest independent production companies in the UK, in our region, who produce content for them in a £10 million deal. It's an amazing sort of first in the UK for this to happen. And so they are now producing content directly for the National Health Service, both for the patients and for their staff. And because what they bring to the party is they know how to engage audiences, they know what audiences look for, and they know how to produce things that are lively and fun and still get the health messages across. So it's this kind of opportunity that creative content producers can look at, really thinking beyond the obvious routes that they ordinarily go to. In terms of who owns the projects, this is always a big issue. We always recommend a collaboration and working with other partners who can bring something new to the table, be it content or technology or distribution. But ownership is always going to be a huge issue, and it's something you do need to resolve very early in the discussions. But the difficulty is not so early on that it bars these creative discussions and possibilities for innovation to happen.
Oui, on sent poindre une conscience.
We hear that it's very important to you to have a collaborative creative approach, and this leads to a few problems.
Because there are about 5 or 6 requests per year. Very often projects that we have are cross-disciplinary production teams with screenwriters, producers, directors, and storyboard creators, designers, gamers, journalists. Well, not all projects have such a widespread team, but very often projects that we look at are very creative. And I think another important point is that without a good screenwriter, a good interactive cross-platform project, however good it is, won't be attractive to the Commission and won't be attractive to broadcasters and other funders. So I think that what is of primary importance in all of this is the quality of the writing in our audiovisual world. And of course, you need other skills to go together with that in order to add to a well-written project, which will make it adaptable to other media, TV and other platforms. But again, I have to insist that very often, it's not very often, but you need to have a well-written project. Otherwise, it comes across as being rather empty or artificial. And things have gone from one extreme to the other. So we had well-written projects to begin with, but we couldn't see the point of developing it for a cross-platform media or cross-media as a cross-media project. And yet today we talk about projects that I'm not talking about projects that are disappointing to the Commission, but very often we have well-written projects in terms of interface, in terms of traffic producing plans, etc., but lack in terms of writing quality. So we've had a good start and kind of a different situation today, but as I said, projects do have to address the problems that I just mentioned. Would anybody like to remark on the multi-platform or cross-platform specificities to writing? Now, of course, we are open to this topic is very new, and so the terminology, I think, is still pretty flexible, and building a vocabulary for this, the jargon that will go together with this new field, is part of the creativity that we are all witness to. And I think that we will be able to work together and working together to write the new terminology that will be developing. So if there are no questions from the room, in terms of joint writing, is this a topical issue, Monsieur Rogard, for example? Is this something that you see a lot at the SACD? Joint writing for me is nothing new. In my view, it's been around in the US in particular for series, episodes in particular. where you have a co-authoring like an office job. It's their speciality, or, for example, they have a job to look after the writing for one character, and sometimes that spreads over decades. In France, it was more troublesome getting this system off the ground because the traditional approach, probably coming from the independent cinema scene and a 90-minute screenwriter. And of course the approach that we have to serialized programs. So we had a bit of difficulty given this context, but one image of success is Plus belle la vie, and this program involves an authoring workshop. And this again applies to Le Village Français program. So co-authoring for screenwriting is, I think, linked to the nature of the work that we're trying to produce. There's no point in, for 90 minutes, having a one-off TV-oriented film to do that. It might be necessary for a daily 26-minute episode. It's also, or co-authoring is also useful, I think, is rather useful for 52-minute episodes, which will be developed upon. Now, quite an amusing anecdote. When I arrived at the SACD, I won't mention names, but the head of a major TV channel said to me that the biggest problem in TV production was authors' rights. Because, for example, I'm going to be broadcasting a 26-minute episode series, which is very popular. All the stage decorations, the background decorations are there, and our authors are writing the follow-up to the series. Well, have you at least set up an option contract for the follow-up to this? No, I haven't done that yet, he said. Well, it turned out that this very popular series turned out to be a complete flop. They had to destroy the sets, and they didn't even manage to air all the episodes that they'd signed up for. So in the end, he'd done well not to be, let's say, to provide for the follow-up by not signing any contract for the follow-up series. But again, we have now models involving writing workshops. And indeed, when I arrived at the SACD, I changed the distribution thresholds within the society, because at the time, 26 minutes episodes were classed in category 2 or 3 productions. So they were sub-productions, and I thought that wasn't right, because I saw the authors from Plus belle la vie, and I thought that they were right, because that soap opera was a pillar in FR3 broadcasting, and the audience numbers at that time were a major part of revenues for the channel. And so we had revenue income, it was proportional to income to the channel, and so we set up a different threshold process, which now corresponds to the airing hours, knowing that broadcasters will put the most expensive series at peak viewing hours. So French-style royalties, the system is actually quite flexible and can adapt to all types of formats. And I think that it will resist in the world of digitalization. And for interactive media as well, I suppose. Well, in terms of interactive works, we face another problem. When you're moving from the video game world, which is a world where authors' rights are not abided by in the traditional sense of the term, what's applied is the right attached to a collective work, which is a system that was set up, for example, for the publication of dictionaries. So the publisher, the producer, has owns the copyright, if you like, to the collective work, which is quite a funny system because, and is very complex because in animation you have a graphic designer, character designers, etc. And it's completely different to classic royalties. However, video studios today say that if there are royalties, given that we need to have a contract with a foreign company to finance the work and have international broadcasting, we can't secure the works. But that's not true because the major animation productions are totally secured and we face no problems in terms of foreign broadcasting, in terms of royalties. So this is obviously a topic that has to be discussed, because it's strange that the CNC will join us on this. Video games are treated sometimes as cultural works, and they have state aid destined for cultural works, and yet the copyright system that's applied is based on a different system. Now, if it is a commercial product which doesn't benefit from state aid for production, I wouldn't mind. But if the work in question are intellectual works, in that case, then I believe that they should abide by copyright rules, as I mentioned before. So thank you very much for talking about copyright and video games. I have a remit on this topic, which will be the object of a consultation with the government starting next week. Oh, well, that's good news. That's very good news. Well, in particular, given that when the tax exemption for video games was then was accepted by Brussels because of the cultural aspect, we were hoping for a review of that after a year, so I've got great expectations for this development. Okay, now we're going to have to close the session because we've reached the end of our allocated time. If anybody has any remark or question in the room, then we can take it. Otherwise, we will join other participants for the networking session that will take place downstairs. Okay, networking, in French, yes. Weaving, in other terms. Okay, I know that you all have appointments and other business to do. I hope we can continue this debate over the next few months, and have a good afternoon as well. Thank you very much. Just a few housekeeping matters before you leave the room. Please give your earphones back so that we can use them again this afternoon. Thank you again to the host of this debate and our panelists. And you are all cordially invited to lunch downstairs, and meeting again this afternoon for the third conference, Revolution Underway in Digital Writing, Digital Storytelling.